So we touched on this with the history panel, and it'll sound a whole lot different, I think, coming from these folks. Everybody gets involved in electronic music in different ways, and Ryan, I won't make you repeat your entire past, but very, very quickly, what is your history? How did you get involved in electronic music, and what made you actually want to do more than be a fan of it?
I won't. A lot of people here are the same people as before, so I won't tell the first story I told. But the other reason that I came into this scene, not only because I loved the music and all these kind of things, but one of the very first things that I remember thinking about is how much I love the music. But you know what? This job would be way better than, like, you know, bussing tables, working in a restaurant, you know, the million other things that I had done prior to this. And it was just like, if I could do something I love, even for a little while, even while I'm in university, just to do something different, maybe it'd be cool, maybe I'll meet some cool people, maybe I'll do something interesting. And, you know, beyond all those other reasons I gave earlier, it was also one of those things where it was like, wow, I can actually do something I really enjoy. And this is what people who are like 40 talk about, like, you know, doing a job you love and doing all these kind of things. And, you know, the 2 or 3 years of, you know, bussing tables and cleaning dishes and all those kind of things really sucked. And I was really happy to be throwing parties. So, you know, without going through that long story, that is the second reason I came into this scene.
Nancy, you didn't grow up in Toronto. You have made clear to me that you don't necessarily know about Toronto's rave past. What I would like to maybe ask you to zoom in on is how you and Conrad and the others formed Mansion and what your focus was. How is it that you guys came out of nowhere to focus on underground electronic music so tightly?
I think a lot of it was, well, first we really loved partying and having a good time, but we got influenced a lot by, for example, like the internet. Maybe around 5 years ago, there was a lot of an upsurge of electronic music being available. And a lot of parties, for example, Ryan Burton's like Faktory parties at the Social, they really kind of inspired us to kind of do our own events. And they started off pretty small. It's mostly house parties and bar parties, but we've really kind of expanded and really started to really love what we're doing and kind of go into it deeper. But yeah. So.
All right, I'll ask you more questions about Mansion and beyond once we move through the panel. Joel, in your case, you were attending raves and warehouse parties and so on. How did you go from being a fan of the music to DJing and owning clubs and running series and so on?
Well, I think my first introduction to the music was, I can actually still remember it was in high school, somebody passing a Chris Shepherd pirate radio mixtape across the table and saying that I should listen to this, and I did, and it sparked something, and I was really intrigued, and I was from Hamilton, and there wasn't a whole lot, at least that I was aware of, going on. So through some investigation and some research, I found my way to some Toronto raves, and eventually ended up sort of feeling really comfortable in the Dose parties and an industry nightclub. And I spent a lot of time there and really enjoyed myself. And at some point, I got the DJ bug, and you know, we started DJing some parties, started trying to do events in Hamilton that didn't go very well, I guess. It wasn't the most metropolitan city, still isn't, but I love it. And I ended up meeting a great business partner and suggested that we should turn my DJ thing into promoting some parties, and we started a little series at 99 Sudbury Street, and once I got into the business end of the scene, it just kind of took off naturally from there. And once the 99 Sudbury kind of dried up for us, we were presented with an opportunity to open up a club, and we just jumped in. And now 8.5 years later, we've made some great partnerships and relationships, and it's helped us, start our new series with Embrace, Electric Island.
Ryan Burton, how did you get involved in electronic music culture?
I don't know. I think me and Mike Gibbs actually over there, who we started Faktory. We were kind of bored with kind of what was happening in the city at the time, and we really wanted there to be more after hours. So we started throwing after hours quite frequently and had a lot of fun. And at the time, I was really unhappy in the job I was in. And as things progressed, I kind of realized that, maybe this was something that I could take more seriously and do, and put more effort into it, and then started booking the Social, and then from there went on to Embrace. So it's kind of how that happened.
Mike Gibbs, how did you move from punk to industrial to electronic? It kind of makes sense, and yet it's all you.
Yes. Well, I went from punk to industrial music in the, I guess, the 80s. I hate to admit it. And from there, basically, we had a band. We had a great drummer, but he didn't show up for a couple of rehearsals, and we rented a drum machine. And then there was no turning back from that. Through that, I got gigs with Ministry, Nine Inch Nails, a lot of bands like that. From that, we ended up being exposed to very early proto house and techno. And basically the same band formed a live techno act. We'd been selling out like the Rivoli, Lee's Palace, places like that. Then our first real rave, there was, I think, 3,500 people. So from there was basically no going back. When that kind of fell apart, I'd always been involved in music, and eventually I just started DJing. And basically, Box of Kittens came together, similar story to Ryan. We were just looking for more events for ourselves. So we started throwing, at that time, not that long ago, maybe 6 years ago, but there wasn't really a lot of underground or basically illegal parties going on. So we weren't really reinventing the wheel, but for a lot of people it seemed like we were, you know. So we got quite a bit of exposure from really not being that original.
So earlier in the history panel, we talked a little bit about how we define rave, because obviously it's a nebulous term. People use it differently, and lots of people now. It's been very fun and interesting to see loads of kids these days back out dancing to bass music in big wide pants, and people using the word rave all in caps and stuff. Sometimes they forget the plur though, the peace, love, unity, respect. That kind of comes in and goes out, comes in, goes out, and all that sort of stuff. But there's definitely been a resurgence within pop culture of a sense of rave, and sometimes it's with a nostalgic look back, sometimes it's very much with a connection to the larger festivals and so on that go on today. And without trying to be like getting each of you to say, yes, what I do is rave or isn't connected or so on, what I'd like to start with is kind of your experience of what you understand rave to be, and whether what you're doing now does connect to your raving past. And if you care to share a story about your favorite rave of all time, feel free.
Well, I would say that of the people up here, I've probably been doing this longer than most, and I've probably done both sides of it. So I've done the sort of the cool underground rave, the old school day one kind of thing where we were in dirty warehouses and throwing these events for people who genuinely were there for the scene and were part of the family. Was that rave? Well, of course it was rave. It was rave at the time. But, we've never stopped. For myself and for the people that I work with and the people that come to our events, we're still doing what we did 22 years ago. It might not be in the same venue. It might not be with the same artist. The music might be slightly different. But at the end of the day, I completely feel that what we're doing is exactly the same thing we started doing on day one. Like I said, it might be a little safer. And, there might be a few more people there. But at the end of the day, for myself anyway, it's always been about the culture, and it's been about the mentality, and it's been about the people, and it's been about, a movement. And as I said earlier in the last panel, our goal has always been to expose as many people as possible to what we do, to expand people's horizons, to introduce them to a scene and a culture that makes them better people and makes the city a better place to live. And whether I'm doing that for 2,000 people in a dirty warehouse in downtown Toronto or doing it for 60,000 people at Ontario Place, I don't feel that there's really any difference. At the end of the day, the music, the culture, the mentality, the people, whether it's your first one or your 100th one, you're there because you love what it is. If you don't like the music, you're not going to be there. But if we can change people on a party by party basis, we can create what rave has always been about. And it's not about being cool and being in the underground and knowing something that someone else doesn't know. It's about being part of a family and being part of a culture and accepting the values that go along with that culture. So, to say, oh, it's big and it's commercial and it's not cool anymore is not true at all, because I think you've seen by this scene, which is much different than, say, disco or, the Nirvana guitar rock or whatever scenes have sort of come before us. They've gotten big, and then they've burned out. Our scene has never left. Our scene is now here 22 years later. Yes, it goes in a bit of a wave, but it's never left. because the fact that we've created a community and a family and a different way of actually living your life, not just the way you listen to your music. So I think, in my view, 100%, rave is rave, and it's still here today.
So are you saying that when you were at Digital Dreams last weekend, or when you guys brought Dead Mouse to Skydome, that you had some of the same feelings in your heart?
Absolutely, because you know, at the end of the day, yes, I'm walking around and the kids are 20 years younger than me, but that was me 20 years ago. That was me in the furry pants and the 27-inch cuffs. Well, maybe not 27-inch cuffs, but but at the end of the day, everybody needs a gateway. And once again, I apologize for saying this, but I mentioned this earlier. It's like, this is the gateway drug. What I do right now, I fully admit, is the gateway drug into coming into this scene. I give the masses the ability to understand what electronic music is, and hopefully they will take that entry-level drug and will learn a lot more about what this scene is, and will eventually be going to Electric Island and to Footwork and to Box of Kittens and to mansion parties because they've learned what this is. Because if I don't offer them that gateway in, they may never find the door.
Fair enough. Nancy, coming from a different perspective, looking at Mansion, which in my eyes has grown increasingly underground, and yet you've had this core crowd that's continued to grow. You may not have experienced Toronto's rave past, but do you and Conrad and the crew, do you hear a lot about the past, and do you feel like Toronto's rave past has an influence on what you're doing now?
Yes, definitely. I think, to be honest, when we really started, we weren't intentionally creating raves. I mean, one of the first parties we ever did was Happy Endings, and it was this like 300-person party in this really small kind of dim sum restaurant that was a lot of fun. And I think over time, and like after throwing many parties, we look back a lot more now. And if you see Foundry, it's a lot about like looking back into artists that were the beginnings of techno, like Juan Atkins, and then also looking at artists that continue to reinvent the genre. So I find myself looking back for inspiration a lot more than I used to, for sure. And like Ryan said, it's when you get introduced into electronic music, it's like you may start with the popular stuff, and then you go deeper and you dig deeper and you look into the history and you get inspired by it.
Joel, what was your favorite rave of all time? Oh, I'm going to put you on the spot.
I can't even answer that question. At this point, so many of those events have just kind of blurred into one amazing memory that to pick out, you know, a certain night in all of those years that stands out is really tough. There was a lot of really special nights and a lot of crazy nights and a lot of long nights. But to get to what you were just asking these two, I just wanted to mention that it's hard to compare then and now. So much has changed. The technology, the way people are social with each other, with the Facebook and social media and all this. It's just, you can't recreate that culture. But I think essentially young people are going out to have a good time. And there's a unity to that I think was special back then. And I think, probably if you're 20 years old and you're, hanging out with your friends at Digital Dreams, it's probably that same feeling, or you're getting that same feeling. And it's tough to compare. I don't know, just because you put on neon shirts and you wear bracelets up to your elbows, does that make you a raver? I don't know, but but I think that I think that in essence, it's young people going out to have a good time, and they're into the same music, and the culture's there. It's just it's not going to be how we remember it.
Well, I think it needs to be said that, of course, we know that the rave movement essentially moved a lot from larger venues, and we covered a lot of this in the history, but clubs have played an increasingly important role as venues, and we had places like Industry, which you mentioned, and which is so important to so many of us. Obviously, clubs like Turbo, System, etc. More recently, places like The Social, Wrong Bar, and so on, that have really kind of helped bring electronic music culture forward, but have to give props to Footwork and just how you guys have managed to book the underground sounds through thick and thin at times when there wasn't so much of a scene. So props.
I just want to quickly jump in here. One of the things you just said just tripped a memory of me. And the reason we started doing what we did back in 91, 92, 93 is because the club scene was terrible. It was top 40. There was very few of them. Nobody enjoyed themselves. It was about getting drunk and having a fight. And that was basically what it was. And there was, because of that dearth of culture and the lack of enjoyment of being there, that is why the rave scene grew. The fact that, everybody says, oh, it moved into the club scene. Well, that's not necessarily a bad thing. What we did is we replaced what was there before, which was awful, with our culture. So that's not necessarily a bad thing.
Oh, I'm not saying it's a bad thing. I'm saying it was kind of an interesting evolution, and there are clubs that really kept true to the underground, and a bunch of us represent that. So, Ryan Burton, Toronto's rave past, do you feel like you have a connection to it, or that it's influenced what you do now?
I mean, I hit it towards the end, and I went to a few events, some of the the Better Living Center. I mean, to me, rave was about like a vibe and people getting together and having fun. And yes, it's changed, like Ryan said. I mean, it's gotten more organized, I guess, and a little safer, but the vibe is still there, and it's people having fun. To me, it's the same.
Mike, often Box of Kittens, you promote your parties as raves.
Changed my life. Like really, I remember a specific party that, I was already an adult, and I went to a specific party with, I think it was Ortekra and Richie Horton, and came away like I wouldn't say a different person, it's not like it's a religious experience or anything like that, but I came with a completely different viewpoint on music and approaching music. And I think, going back to what Ryan said, I mean, for most people, not the people sitting up here, music is the background for most people's lives. It's not like the focal point. So, like artists come and go, people move on, whatever. But when you go to these large-scale events, you're learning certain social skills. You're living in a certain society that doesn't necessarily exist outside of those walls. So people interact in completely different ways. I mean, the gay culture is an extremely important part of underground music. Yeah, especially in the 80s and 90s, gay people were marginalized, we're a marginalized culture. And the rave scene totally embraced that culture. The rave scene didn't really have any racial issues to a great extent. And to some extent, it didn't really have issues with age or anything like that. So I think when people go to these large-scale events, they see how people could be living as opposed to perhaps how people do live. And I think that's probably actually more, people come because of music, and they come because, whatever, they come for a myriad of different reasons. But what they can come away with is the fact, everybody can basically get along, and maybe that's the way we should be getting along.
Thanks, everyone. So the last 5 years or so in particular has been, as we've said, the sounds have never left. The scenes kind of changed and then regrouped, evolved, and so on. Different sounds obviously came out, hit the clubs and after parties and so on. But, if we were to zoom in on the last 5 years or so, Toronto, maybe expand that to 8, but when we kind of connect past to present, there was, in my mind, a point when electronic music kind of, people didn't quite know where to put it, what to do with it, basically how to promote it. And then we had this little explosion of the whole mashup culture and the kind of ironic electronic music, people out there making crap, in my mind, a lot of times, but it became more and more musicians. And we saw like a whole new wave of producers out there that really developed their sound, grew as musicians, started to play instruments, started to really learn how to use their gear and so on. And we also saw a lot of this kind of come into the clubs, and different things happen in spaces like the social, I think about Arcade Fridays, I think about, early days at Wrong Bar and so on. So I'd love to have any of you sort of touch on what you see as real kind of connecting points in Toronto between past and present, whether it's a weekly series, monthly series, specific club or promoters. Who would you kind of, that we haven't mentioned so far, give shout outs to for carrying the torch?
Well, for me, we never stopped doing sort of underground parties in that time frame. I would, if you ever had to sort of pick a spot where we all thought electronic music was going to die, it was probably 5 to 8 years ago. And, in 2008, we stopped doing WAMF, just because not enough people were showing up, and, the parties that we were throwing were starting to die off. And we totally thought this was coming to an end. So, we went into the only niche that the Destiny was still able to bring people out that wasn't, a sort of a commercial sound, which was drum and bass and jungle. And we were able to survive those very lean years and do very well during those very lean years by having that last niche of the rave scene. So for me, that's why I keep saying, for me, the rave scene never really died, because once a month I was throwing a party for 2,000 or 3,000 people, and that's what Destiny always was. So, outside of that sort of strange drum and bass kind of world, there wasn't much. There was 300-person clubs, 400-person clubs, and this and that. And then slowly, from about 2008 onward, it just started growing and growing and growing. And then, Ryan Burton and Adam Gill and myself finally got back together in 2010 and said, hey, we got to bring WEMF back. This scene's exploding again. So it definitely took a little bit of a hiatus, but it never disappeared completely. So, sorry, that was a very long answer to a very short question, but, the connecting points for me was the fact that we were able to keep the spark, just like, Quest for Fire. We had the stick with the fire on it, and, we were carrying it once a month to these parties. And other than what we were doing, there wasn't much going on out there. I mean, like I said, it was 300-person clubs, 400-person clubs, that was about it. And luckily, we were able just to take it on for about 2 more years, then all of a sudden, everybody came back, and it exploded all over again. So, the defining moment really was the fact that, we did our little niche thing, and then Embrace came along and really established electronic music as a nightclub destination in Toronto again. And if it had not been for Embrace, I don't know that necessarily it would have got as big as it has gotten today again.
I would give props as well to ADD with their whole Random Land thing and many things that they did. But let's talk a little bit about Embrace. But before we get into talking Embrace and ADD and such, I just want to ask you, Ryan, how did you guys know that people were ready to have WEMF again? Why could we have the World Electronic Music Festival return for a number of years?
Well, when we stopped doing it, we had gone through a couple of years where we'd gone from 20,000 people to 10,000 people to 5,000 people, and then literally the last year we did, we got 3,000. So I mean, I wasn't willing to risk my house to throw a party that I loved throwing, and really it was just a financial decision at the end of the day, and we just realized people weren't interested anymore. And the scene in general was like that as well. There wasn't big events happening on a regular basis anywhere other than maybe some trance on Saturday night at the Government. So in the 2 years we didn't do it, nobody seemed to care that much. Then all of a sudden around 2009, the Skrillexes and these new acts, then the dubstep world and all these kind of things happened, and it reinvigorated a scene that was kind of getting bored. Trance was dying, house was just filling the clubs. But there was nothing that changed the world like the rave scene did back in 1991 or in 88 in Europe, but in 1991 in Toronto, where it was completely new. The drug was new, the music was new, the people were new, and it completely changed everything. And it wasn't until really that whole dubstep culture, that whole bass culture came around in about 2009 that there was this spark of new kids coming out and going out to parties again. And all of a sudden, boom, the scene exploded, and that's what it needed. It needed something that was completely different than anything else that had happened before.
Interesting. I'm sure dubstep will come up again. Ryan Burton, you look like you wanted to say something back
No,
there.
I mean, I just wanted to say, like, the whole ADD Random Land thing, I mean, that was hugely influential. Circa was a crazy adult playground with, like, bars that lit up when you touched them and all this weird stuff. But just when Circa closed and Random Land stopped, just all the promoters and DJs that were kind of birthed out of that club, like that was huge for Toronto.
Can you talk a little bit about the series, the Arcade Friday series that happened at the Mod Club?
Yeah, I mean that was another great series. That kind of happened right after Circa closed, and kind of Mario was stopping ADD, and we just started the Arcade Fridays at Mod Club, and I think it had like a 3-year run maybe, but it was the right place at the right time, I'd say, for that party. It was kind of like Ryan said, it was 2000, maybe 2009. Dubstep was getting really big. You sensed a huge resurgence in the scene.
So we know that there, as you guys have touched on, I mean, drum and bass stayed strong. Definitely techno stayed very strong in Toronto. House music, whether it was in the clubs or outside of the clubs, stayed strong. And in fact, a lot of Toronto's biggest electronic music producers came out of our house scene. All kinds of new and experimental sounds, bass music producers, again, who developed all kinds of unique sounds and cultures. And so, like I'm asking Ryan about when he knew it was ready for, World Electronic Music Festival to return, Nancy, when did you, most of us start parties because we want to bring forward what we want to hear, but beyond that, what made you guys have confidence that you could throw parties, bring out people, and introduce them to weirder and weirder music?
I think, well, we started off pretty small, and it wasn't like super serious from the beginning, but we realized we started developing a following, and they were really interested in what we were bringing, so we could surprise them with something interesting. So we kind of definitely took advantage of that and decided to go weirder. It really goes along with our tastes and what we personally find interesting. Like for the acts that we bring, we try to bring what is exciting to us and throw the parties that we want to go to.
Mike, Joel, do you want to touch on Toronto's house and techno scenes and how the evolution of the last 5 years? And one of the key things that I think is really interesting is back in the earlier rave years, it was all about the international headliners. And of course, there are loads of locals on the bills, but the locals have become the headliners increasingly, including at a number of your parties and clubs. So can you talk a little bit about the evolution that we've seen here in the music and how Box of Kittens can be what it is today?
Yeah, well, basically, we were kind of sick of headliners. Not that I don't know them personally, so it's not that kind of issue, but we just felt there was a lot of Toronto talent, and there were too many places relying on headliners. I think to a great extent that's still an issue in Toronto. And, the locals never really got their chance to shine. So in this case, the locals basically being me and my three other partners. So really, we started our events basically as a reaction to that. We just wanted to have more events that showcased ourselves. And we seemed to really hit a nerve, we can compete with anybody in the world. But if you go to, say you go to Berlin or something like that, the locals get an international exposure, partly because it's an industry there. It's not an industry here. That's one of the issues. But that's slowly changing, and I like to think that, because of events like ours and at the other extreme, events like Ryan's, and, in between Footwork and everything, there's a real industry being created in North America. I mean, to a great extent, it's the last market. I guess China will be coming eventually. But, nobody ever wrote a song or became a DJ because they thought they were going to make $1 million. But at the same time, it's a very trying time for musicians to make money. And if you want to see artists develop and get better, they have to be able to make a living. If you're busy working 50, 60 hours a week or whatever you're doing, it's very hard to make creative music. So if you're in Berlin, for instance, you can live off of music. In Toronto, it's extremely difficult to do. So I think between what we've all been doing, we're perhaps developing a future, like a new models, new ways for people to make revenue, where they can actually spend their lives being musicians or promoters or radio hosts, or as opposed to being a plumber and just trying to muddle through with your art when you have the time.
Joel, I want to turn that same question to you, because as we talk about acts like Art Department or Carlo Leo or any number of people from Toronto who are currently touring all over the world all the time, a lot of them really came up playing and still do play when they're in town. Footwork. Can you tell us a little bit about how you nurtured local electronic music culture?
Sure. Well, I'll start by saying that Toronto's talent is second to none. There's so much undiscovered talent in the city that deserves more exposure than they're getting currently, and I'm really happy to see that so many of our local guys are now touring and getting the respect they deserve around the world. So, Footwork's been fortunate to be able to have that kind of talent at our fingertips, and in turn, we've given them a venue to sort of cut their teeth, work out, whether it's on an all locals night or whether it's opening for a headliner, to really work out their skills live and be ready when the opportunity knocks for them to take it to the next level. So, Art Department, of course, is played with us before they became Art Department. Back when they were Johnny White and Kenny, they played with us. Carlo Leo was a resident that played on our locals Focus Friday nights. So I think we paid him like $100, every Friday night or every other Friday night to come and play. And he was this shy guy that just kind of had this ear for monster techno records, and now his talent caught the eye of Dubfire, and now he's a superstar in his own right. So I'm honored that we were a stepping stone in their careers, and I'm glad to be able to support local artists.
Well, let me ask all of you then to sort of pick up on that theme. Is it a priority to those of you who book artists for your events? Is it a priority to you to book local talent? And also, as a second question, as we go around with this, do you feel a difference from your audience in interest in supporting the local or knowing who the locals are? Let's start with you, Ryan Burton.
Yeah, I mean, definitely it's important for us to book local talent, and we have a group of DJs that we work with steadily, and it's changing. If we talk about Zed's Dead, for example, we started booking them. I don't know, when they first came out, misspelled their name on flyers a bunch of times, and really worked with them, and they've blown up. So I mean, it's definitely important to support that, just because of the talent that we do have here. There is so much of it.
Other folks want to talk about locals that you book?
Well, Box for Kittens is basically 4 local DJs, so it's kind of changed recently because two of the partners are out of town right now. But to be honest, I've found we do book out headliners now. Like tonight, we have an event with Robag Rume. Please come. And but to be honest, most of the people who come to our events are there to hear us. So generally we bring a headliner in because it's somebody we want to see, and in general, we can't see them somewhere else. I mean, it's difficult because, Footwork's played such an important role because it's one of the only mid-sized venues in town. So it's in a perfectly positioned that allow smaller artists to get a chance, and but bigger artists to come and show off to an intimate crowd. I think most DJs or musicians much prefer performing to an intimate crowd if they can. I mean, it's fun to play to huge crowds, but it's a completely different experience to play to 200 or 300 people. And I think a lot of the guys, maybe who play at Digital Dreams, they totally rip up a huge stage, but it's to some extent it's pre-planned. There's lighting, there's explosions, there's dancing girls, but all those guys, they still got into it for the right reasons. They all love the music. Well, most of them, I'm guessing. And I think most of them are probably quite happy to play a dark room with one light and a bunch of people just getting down, And I think it stays that way.
If you don't have an audience, you don't have fun.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah.
Pretty simple. Ryan, in the case of booking your events, when you're trying to do that balance of big headliners and bringing in the locals, what do you look for? How do you zoom in on the locals you want to present?
Well, I mean, obviously, in throwing the festivals that we do, we obviously have to focus on the masses at some point in the discussion. But I mean, we specifically chose Canada Day weekend to do this event when we decided to do Digital Dreams a couple of years ago, because we knew that would give us the opportunity to showcase Canadian talent on Canada's birthday. And yes, we may not be booking, all of the underground artists that are great in Toronto. We don't really necessarily feel that that's our role in the scene right now. That's the role of these guys right now, to develop these artists and bring them up through the scene. The role of a company like Live Nation and Electronic Nation is to then highlight those artists who have then made it and are on the world scene. So, giving art department, almost, a whole afternoon last year on our very first time we did Digital Dreams was, a very Canadian angled thing. Having Richie Houghton headline, the Echo Beach stage the last 2 years was a conscious decision around him being Canadian, not just being Richie Houghton. There's a number of other examples, on the various stages, but 100% we very much appreciate the talent that's here. Carl Leo, I mean, we can go on, but we have to take the people that have made it, and these people standing here are some of the reasons that these people make it. So once they're there, we're more than happy to do whatever we can to keep that brand and showcase those big Canadian names to the masses.
Nancy, in the case of Mansion, we're talking about obviously people like Nautilus hosting a release party. I think you've had a Gyp Jerks through. You've had loads of locals come through. What would you describe as your focus that way, and how do you work to highlight indie and local artists?
I do think that we are also a bit guilty of booking a lot of international headliners rather than having locals at headliners, but I also think it's great exposure for those emerging artists in Toronto. Every lineup we do is kind of carefully curated. We try to match the headliner to locals that make sense, and in turn, they're very grateful because a lot of these headliners are artists that they really care about, and they think it's good exposure for them as well. For sure.
Actually, I'm going to ask you to keep the mic in your hand because very quickly I'd like to touch on the issue of venues. You know, we have talked a lot about moving from large stadiums and so on into clubs, and it's not about better or worse. It's really about what exists. And, you know, as the city has more and more condos coming in, and, you know, as I write the Then and Now series, easily half the clubs I've written about, the venues they used to be in are now condos. We just, you know, the landscape of the city has changed and is changing. How important is it to you? I'm going to turn to the underground scene, because I know in your case, obviously, it's like a whole looking for huge venues. There's a whole bunch of permits and other issues and so on. But when you're looking for, like, you know, spaces of 1,000 or less to do underground parties and make them interesting, how do you do that in a city like this now, where there's less and less warehouses and spaces to access? Nancy.
I honestly feel like I'm on a never-ending quest to find venues. I do believe it's actually getting more and more difficult. There's a lot of spaces that are not willing to take the risk of throwing an event, much less a rave. And obviously there's the SOP process and all the additional costs, but I also find it being really rewarding. And I guess like the art of finding venues is not just about what the venue actually looks like. It's about combining a venue that could actually look really awesome or be completely mundane with the right concept and with the right music and with the right production. So for example, Foundry, it was a festival that we threw in an underused space called the Black Box, and every artist that we brought during that month, we paired it up with interesting visual production. So we really tried to use the space and make it unique to us.
I've seen you do parties in former or existing churches, in retail spaces in between retail outlets, and
what
all
I mean
kinds of
by
different
like
things.
mundane spaces, like sometimes you'll look at a dim sum restaurant and you'll never ever think it's like a rave spot. So we try to pair that with the right concept and make it come to life. And churches, for example, we looked at a lot of struggling churches around Toronto, and they actually became like the backdrop of some of our most amazing parties. I mean, it's also about just like getting on your bike and going around the city. Sometimes you find something that's for lease and it's like a furniture basement, but it actually is a wicked party space.
Nice. Similarly, Box of Kittens, you guys tend to use underused spaces.
Yeah, except we're a lot more lazy than Mansion, so we just try and find the easiest venue. But then again, and a lot of times we're a lot more illegal than Mansion as well. And though lately some of our most successful parties we've actually teamed up with these guys, and yeah, it's got to the point downtown where you have to be legitimate. You have to have an SOP, because there are just so few spaces that aren't going to get a noise complaint now, that if the police come, which invariably, you know, if they're not doing anything that night, they will, then you got to be prepared to, you know, answer whatever the questions they're asking, and be willing to throw away whatever money you invested in that event, you know. So I think it's getting tougher and tougher. I mean, a city like Montreal, people are actually willing to travel. Maybe it's because they have a better subway system or something, I don't know. But people are willing to travel. I mean, there are still a lot of spaces in Toronto, but most of them are north of Bloor Street, and most of us don't go north of Bloor Street, so...
It kind of feels like it's 1993 all over again, hearing these comments, because I spent a good 5 years of my life driving through every warehouse district in Toronto and looking at every church and every place with a for lease sign, looking for Destiny spaces back in the day. And it sounds like you guys are doing exactly the same thing that we did back then.
Thankfully. And on the flip side of that, I'd just like to touch on a resurgence of festival culture that's happened and in fact expanded beyond what we've ever had. So obviously we've talked about Digital Dreams, we've talked about Veld's been mentioned as another biggie, but we've also got things like Sound in Motion, which is happening in this city this weekend right now, all kinds of great stuff. And I'd encourage you guys to also check out Coronation Park. There's a free Sound in Motion festival event there all day going till 11 o'clock tonight. Lots of great music. And of course we have new things like the Electric Island series. Joel, can you talk a little bit about what that is and how you guys got the island for electronic music and what that means to you?
So we're doing Electric Island as a series every long weekend this summer on Toronto Island, partnered with Embrace and another promotion company, Platform, and it kind of came together. I think Platform managed to work this out with the city, and just on a note, I think we talk a lot about the commercialization of this music, and one thing that it's done, I think, is open some doors. It just doesn't seem so weird anymore to City Hall. You hear dance music, you see it on TV, it's in all the commercials. It's just, I think maybe 10 years ago even, it was just so outrageous that they just wouldn't even take your call. And, right now is a great time to be able to work with them, and they've been pretty supportive, surprisingly supportive. It's another thing to note that we're here today and at the Harbourfront Centre even talking about this. It just seems kind of strange, but it's great that it's happening. And so the Island series is something that our three entities have come together to work on, and we're just trying to give Toronto another outdoor option. I think it's well overdue.
Indeed. Thankfully, we are seeing more outdoor options. Ryan, with Embrace and the shows and festivals and so on, what is, when you guys are bringing together electronic music, on the festival tip, what do you see happening in the city? Is it because there's a lot more people, therefore there can be a lot more festivals? Can you be more adventurous in the programming that way? What's Embrace's focus when it comes to doing large-scale electronic music events?
The Electric Island was a big thing for us. We did the whole Skrillex kind of festival last year. Unfortunately, that didn't happen this year. We are doing Mad Decent outside this year. But yeah, I think you said it. There's more people that are into the music, and that just makes it easier to do these things. And kind of like Joel said, it's not weird to ask the city to do a party like that on the island as it would have been even 5 years ago. It's definitely changing, and for the better, for sure.
So we've got about 10, 15 minutes to go and want to have time for questions. I'm going to ask one more question of all of you, which won't come out of the blue because I emailed it to you all. And just, kind of as we have been looking back and also looking forward, I guess what excites you and frustrates you about the electronic music scene in the city right now? Basically, what do we excel at and what do we need to do more of? Starting with you, Mike.
Well, I think actually Ryan is right that he's helping us, because in this case it's definitely a trickle-down theory of music. Not that I have anything against Skrillex or deadmau5 or anything like that. I think they're all awesome, actually. But it's tough. Like, you'll have an artist like Richie Hawtin play Digital Dreams. There'll be 50,000 people going crazy. But you could have the same artist without the headlining name he could play exactly the same music, and the kids, you can't get people out. Part of the issue now is because we've been relying on Facebook for promotion for the last few years. I think that Facebook is kind of past its prime in this particular regard. And in a lot of ways, we've been going back to the old-fashioned flyers and actually calling people and that kind of thing, So, to me, the two frustrating things are the venues. That's kind of out of our hands to some extent, and just trying to get people out is always difficult. It's always a struggle. But we keep struggling along. So
Ryan Burton, what excites you? What frustrates you? What do we excel at? What do we need?
I think the venue thing is very frustrating. On all levels, on all sizes. I don't think there's enough of them in the city. So that can be frustrating. And especially for us, we do lots more than just electronic music, so it's hard. But I think it's really exciting where it's heading. Seeing everybody that's getting into the music is great. And I feel like it was like 2005, people were getting into it through electro, and then it was dubstep. I don't know what it is now, but people just seem to be into it, and it's great.
Moving along, Joel, what excites you? What frustrates you?
I'm excited about just the growth of the music in general. I'm excited about the Digital Dreams parties. I'm excited about great promoters like Mansion coming up and just doing things a little different. They're bringing in an artist that a lot of promoters wouldn't take a risk on, and they're able to do that because they're legitimately great promoters. I'm excited about the Box of Kittens parties. I'm excited about the growth of the music in general. I think it's going to be a really exciting next couple of years to see, where it's going to go, how big Digital Dreams is going to get. I mean, the trickle down from Digital Dreams just on an immediate level, you know, when 50,000 ravers hit the streets at midnight on a Saturday or Sunday night, like the clubs are packed, and it's helping everybody. You know, as a venue owner, one of our struggles is, you know, we don't have the luxury of, you know, of a promoter where we can bounce around and keep our spaces interesting. We're stuck with a room, and it's not a very big room, and it's the same every week. And keeping that interesting for 8.5 years has been one of our biggest challenges. So I'm excited about the scene in general right now. I think it's going in a great direction. And my most frustrating, hello? The most frustrating thing I think going on right now is all the new residents that are downtown, and it's making it really difficult for new venues to get started. For, you know, it's kind of hindering the growth a little bit, and it's, you know, it's I don't know where the balance is going to be, but you know, whether eventually the clubs will just get pushed out of downtown. I don't think for the city as a whole that's a good idea. I think we've got to find the balance and sort of maintain a little bit of nightlife culture in the downtown core. It's really important for Toronto. It's you know, the entertainment district was a big thing for a long time, and they broke it down piece by piece, and it's not there anymore. You know, whether those were the clubs that we liked to go to or not, it was an entertainment core of the city, and it's a bit frustrating dealing with the gentrification of Toronto. But that's
yeah,
where it is.
more people and more problems finding venues. And you know, we all hope that Footwork has like a 100-year lease, right? Nancy, what do you think the city is excelling at right now, and something that we could use?
I will also echo frustrations of like policies like moratoriums and liquor laws that make it really difficult for new people to really enter this industry, as well as the lack of spaces. But I think what Toronto is great at is that we are such like an open-minded, creative city, and there's so much potential to really define ourselves in the near future with our own different signature sounds. And I think we can do that with the right infrastructure. And what I mean by infrastructure is having more festivals, more various kinds of festivals that serve different kinds of genres or underground music, a variety of different venues, and as well as, for example, helping labels get off the ground, because it's really difficult to actually make money running a label. So if we can actually, but it's still really important. So if we can have all that come together, I think we can have a really strong future and really define ourselves like a lot of cities like Berlin and London.
I mean, obviously, this year has been great. You know, on the upper level of event production. I mean, masses are coming into the city. You know, the 3 or 4 great examples. I mean, we did 65,000 people for Swedish House Mafia. We did 30,000 for Sensation, and then another 60,000 for Digital Dreams. And I mean, those numbers are just, you know, as somebody who's been in this scene for 22 years and been struggling to get 800 people or 1,200 people or whatever it is, or 5,000 people to come out to WAMF just so we can keep it going. I mean, those numbers are just phenomenal. I mean, the scene has exploded, and you know, that is a great thing. I mean, that is an amazing thing for everybody sitting here, because whether it's us doing, you know, the event, or all of these people coming into the music and then expanding into all the things that these guys do, it's good for everybody that the scene is as big as it is. I mean, hopefully it lasts. I mean, nothing lasts forever, but you know, right now it only seems to be getting bigger on a daily basis. You know, frustration, I mean, it's always going to be venues. I mean, you know, even we're limited on sizes that we can take things to, whether it be at Rogers Centre or Ontario Place, wherever it is. But where I really see the problem in the venue size isn't necessarily finding that 1,000-person venue that you guys use. For in my business on a day-to-day basis, where I'm really frustrated is that venue that's 3,000 people to 6,000 people. That does not exist in Toronto. You literally have to be an artist that, you know, is affordable and can play a 3,000-person venue, or you have to play a festival. There's nothing in the middle where you can go out and play for 6,000 or 7,000 or 8,000 or 9,000 like you can if you're a rock band and you can play the ACC, or you can play, you know, other arenas and venues around the city. That size of venue just does not exist in this city, and that's probably my biggest frustration on a day-to-day basis, because literally we're limited to 2,500 people or 20,000 people. Like, there's nothing in the middle.
Venues. Definitely the frustration that
all of you
heard
should go
for
into the venue
decades.
business.
Yeah. And it should also be mentioned that the drum and bass scene in this city has had a resurgence as well. It never, as you mentioned, it never really died off, but it's been coming back strong. And of course, Platform got mentioned, party promoters like Break and Enter and others. There's been a lot of crews who continue to produce quality underground events. So in many ways, it's an exciting time in Toronto all over again. So we have time to take a couple of quick questions. Would anybody like to ask us about current things going on in the city? Uh-oh. Okay, Robbie.
Thanks a lot. Oh yeah, sure, no problem. So I've been partying for a long time. And okay, so back in the days, they were a lot more creative when it came to actual events and spaces. I noticed that a lot with you guys. You guys have like specific venue you guys work with all the time. How can we do that and push that more? Because it actually, I find that the more creative the venue, the more creative the artist. So you're able to book different artists based on the venue itself. We've already talked about the lack of the smaller venues within that range. What can we do to change that? And as well, why not think outside of the downtown core? I mean, a lot of European cities do it. London doesn't have a downtown core where everybody, it's all over. Paris, Berlin.
I'll just quickly answer this and pass this off to these guys who do this on a more regular basis. But, the one thing that's changed is when we were doing parties in 1991 and 92, half the city was empty. I mean, the whole downtown was full of empty warehouses. There was empty buildings on Richmond and Adelaide. Those don't exist anymore. So, you could say, hey, why don't you find new, more creative venues? But we live in a vibrant city that real estate is worth $1,000 a square foot in. There's nobody building concert halls in downtown Toronto anymore. And there's nobody building nightclubs in downtown Toronto anymore for a reason. It's way more profitable to use that money or to use that space for other uses, especially condos and grocery stores and that kind of thing. So it's not the promoters not trying to be creative or not trying to find new places. It's the developers making those venues very, very expensive to use for what we want to use them for.
This is more for Ryan. How important is having like Echo Beach stage at Digital Dreams for everyone? But how important is it having a techie, deeper stage at a festival like that?
I think very important because obviously we have all the people involved in Digital Dreams, whether it be myself or the people at Unique or Capture or my partner Destiny. We all come from the original beginnings of the scene, and the way we designed Digital Dreams was in a very specific way. We designed it to have a base stage which kind of spoke to the Destiny history and the dubstep and a lot of the younger kids who are coming into the scene. And then you go into sort of that college age, you go to the main stage, you do your fist pumping, you love your house DJs, your Tiestos, you're like Mike and Dimitri Vegas. And then you graduate to the Echo Beach stage. And we wanted to make sure that we had the full life cycle of electronic music, and we weren't just like the 25 other music festivals that you see that seem to be carbon copies of each other across North America right now. We wanted to make sure that when you come there, you are exposed to a lot of different musical genres that you might not be if you just went to the cookie cutter, event. So that's why we do what we do. And that's why the Echo Beach stage exists.
Thank you, Ryan. Thank you, Ryan Kruger, Nancy Chen, Joel Smye, Ryan Burton, Mike Gibbs, not just for being here, but also for what you guys create in the city. Thank you. Thanks, you guys, for being here.
And a huge round of applause for Denise Benson. Another architect of the scene. Thank you, everybody, for joining us this afternoon. Since you all like electronic music, you should know that we are having the Canadian premiere of We Are Mode Selector, documentary about the influential German techno duo at the Studio Theater at 8 p.m. That's in 1 hour. We Are Mode Selector. Also, Grounders will be up on this stage in about 30 minutes, and Born Ruffians on the main stage at 9:30. Thanks very much for joining us today.